Morning, everybody, and welcome to the Swan Valley Statutory Planning Committee meeting of the 12th of February 2025. Apologies for the delay in the meeting start this morning. I declare the meeting open at 9:11 a.m. To welcome everyone online and present in person today. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be available for viewing via the Commission's website and YouTube. Committee members may refer to technical devices during the meeting to assist them in considering the information before them. I'd like to acknowledge that today we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past and present. So we don't have any apologies this morning, but we do have Member Franklin attending online today. Welcome, Member Franklin, and welcome to all members today. Members, are there any disclosed interest? I currently have nil. Thank you all. And declaration of due consideration. Can all members please indicate that they have read and considered the agenda ahead of today's meeting? Thank you very much all. Questions from members and responses from this DPLH staff. We did have a question from Commissioner Herron, and that was in relation to our item that we're dealing with today in relation to the telecommunications tower. Commissioner Herron, you've received the information?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. And the previous minutes of Wednesday, the 11th of December 2024. Members, are there any issues or comments that you wish to raise in relation to the minutes? Okay, could I please have a mover and seconder to adopt the minutes? Moved by Commissioner Herron, seconded by Member Zanino. That's carried. Thank you very much. Deputations and presentations. We do have some today. So Sam, could you please announce deputations?
Good morning, everyone. I welcome everyone this morning that's present to make a deputation to the committee, either in person or via Zoom. You will be invited to join the table or promoted to a panellist via Zoom to deliver your deputation this morning. You have been advised of your allocated time through an email you received from Commission Support, which will be managed by a timer which will appear on the screen. And that will count down the time. It will change colour at 30 seconds and turn red when your time has concluded. If you do have a PowerPoint presentation, this will be displayed on the screen throughout your deputation, and you are requested to advise us as you wish to advance the slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. So our first deputation is from Stephen Waddington, and Stephen is in person today. Yes. Stephen, welcome to the meeting. Would you like to come to the table and present your deputation? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Is that okay if I sit?
Yes, of course. Please do.
Thank you, members. My name is Steve Waddingham. I was born in Swan District Hospital in 1972. Apart from 3 years playing sport overseas professionally, I've lived and owned in the Swan Valley my entire life. I'm a Valley boy, born and bred. I'd like to first focus on the purpose that the body here gathers for, and that is to administer the Swan Valley Planning Act of 2020. I have a little bit of history behind this that I'd like to share, and that is that a generation before you, and perhaps some overlap, everyone with respect to Councillor Zanino, I know that you've represented the area for a long time, but a group of people got together in the 1980s with a view to protect the Swan Valley as a place being special. I know this because my father was the Deputy President of the Shire of Swan at the time. I sat in the lounge room listening to the conversations of the people that went before him, people like Tom Hertzfield, Gavin Troy, Jean Van der Klaasorst, Carl Alloy, Eric Lumsden, Jack Polich, Charlie Gregorini. These were people with a vision for what they felt that the City of Swan and the Swan Valley specifically should be protected. The Court Government in 1995 introduced the Swan Valley Planning Act of 1995, and I make note that the very themes that are in that Act in 1995 are exactly carried over, word for word, into the Act in 2020. They are technology agnostic. The vision at that time was to protect the area, and that has carried through with that theme. I'd like to highlight some of the shortcomings that are in the presentation that are made before you, and halfway down the page, on page 11 in your pack, I think very specifically it says here, that the site mentioned is zoned rural residential. It is very hard to understand how a 30-metre tower in a rural residential area is in any way congruent with living in the area. Clear from the verbiage on the pages given to you that the City of Swan very much is the people that live in the area are very much against the application. And I'd like to draw very heavily to the point, and I think key, that the telecommunications infrastructure in Area D is specifically a precluded land use. It should be the onus of the applicant to argue to you why this should be added, not the other way around. Lastly, not lastly, but most importantly, it is also well and truly above the 9-metre height limit that is actually specifically mentioned within the bounds of the Act. A lick of green paint on this monstrosity is not going to change the amenity for the people that live in the area. This particular application is no way consistent with the Swan Valley Planning Act Scheme 1, and to say so is nothing but a fabrication of the facts that are in front of you. And I urge you all to both look at the data and the clear evidence that it's not wanted, it's not in line with the Act. The proponents are arguing to give to us a piece of technology that no one wants on the basis that they are going to be paid to do so. This is not in the theme of the Valley. The application is a clear departure from the scheme's requirements, and the application should be rejected. Thank you.
Stephen, for your deputation. Members, are there any questions of Stephen today?
Yes, please. Sorry, Stephen, I just want to ask, I mean, obviously some of your attachments that you included as well, making reference to power lines. Would you accept, however, that infrastructure is an important part of any and every area?
I accept that the infrastructure is important, but the infrastructure needs to be in alignment with the themes of the Valley. The very pieces within here preclude it specifically as a usage. It's not in alignment with what's the Valley, and your very bylaws and the applications there are telling you so.
Thank you.
Stephen, just on the use, it is a discretionary use, so that means that discretion must be granted in providing development approval. Just picking up on Commissioner Heron's point, when the report talks to the fact that there is a coverage issue for the locality, I think we all understand that telecommunications towers are not the most attractive infrastructure in terms of their height and scale, and that many local communities feel very strongly when these towers are proposed in their locality. But faced with a coverage issue, what would, in terms of dealing with that, whilst I take all of the points on board, there is a service issue here, and the service delivery is through these telecommunications towers at some height. So I'm just really interested in your perspective in balancing the need for the infrastructure versus the amenity.
With respect to the coverage map that's given to you, does anyone in this room know what that coverage is of? Because it doesn't say so. If you were to overlay the 4G coverage on this map, it has entire coverage. If you look at the 50 applications that were given to you, 49 of them are against, and over 20 of those specifically mentioned they do not have a problem with coverage. We live there. There isn't a problem. We are having a problem manufactured for us to tell us that there's an issue that doesn't need to be solved. This map is not of 4G coverage. This map is of 5G coverage. There is no gap in telecommunications.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate your local insights. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Stephen? Thank you, and appreciate you coming in person today.
Thank you very much.
Is from Jenny Neils. Jenny's been having some technical issues this morning, so we are going to have Jenny on the telephone. And
okay, thank you, Sam.
So, Chair, is it permissible for me to listen to the other deputations?
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, Jenny. It's Sam at the Planning Commission. I do now have you on speakerphone with the committee here, and they're ready to listen to your deputation on the development application for the telecommunications tower on Moore Road in London. So over to you for your 3-minute deputation. Thank you.
Thank you. Morning, committee. Apologies, my computer is not being cooperative. My name is Jenny Nielsen, and I live within 250 metres of the proposed tower. With respect to the Swan Valley Planning Act 2020, the Swan Valley Planning Framework guides for future development and new tourism and hospitality opportunities and protects the long-term agricultural production in the region. This construction does not fall within the guidelines for future development and new tourism and hospitality. It is not an appropriate development. Until this proposal was submitted, I was considering setting up an Airbnb for tourists. But now, rather than promoting the rural atmosphere, vineyards, wineries and tranquility, I'll have to say, come and have a look at a steel tower with magnetic dishes. Of my clients to the hills, this will also affect me financially. I will lose money. I am concerned that my horses may be adversely affected. Hence, my safety is of high concern to me while the tower is being constructed. The construction of the tower is close to my fence line, and horses do not like seeing objects, e.g. steel beams, being lifted high above their heads. I could be in danger of being injured. I think there is an alternative location. There is an alternative location approximately 600 metres north of this proposed site, a more logical location. It's a vacant land, some cleared area amongst the trees, direct access by road off Moore Road and opposite a troop farm. I'm sure the hens won't object and put in complaints. There are only 3 houses in close proximity and less likely to even see the tower. In summary, as I previously stated, under the Swan Valley Planning Act, this construction does not fall within these guidelines. It does not fall under tourism, hospitality, or long-term agricultural production in the region. It is an inappropriate development in the wrong location. With respect, I would expect the WA Planning Commission to consider the 49 objections to this proposal and reject this development at this location. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Jenny, thank you. It's Emma Cole here, the chair. I just wanted to say thank you very much for your deputation. I will just ask members now if they have any questions now that you've made your deputation. Members, any questions for Jenny?
Yes, I
Yes,
do.
go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair. Jenny, you mentioned about the site 600 metres north. Do you know who owns that property?
I believe it's under Shire constraints. It's a vacant lot opposite on the corner of Bisbee and Moore Road.
Thank you.
And Jenny, just Emma here again, in relation to your proximity to the tower, which boundary are you on in terms of direction from the site?
West.
West, okay. Thank you, Jenny. Members, any other questions? Thank you. Thanks very much, Jenny.
Thank you.
Our next deputation is from Mark Bade, I'm going to say, from SAQ Consulting, and Mark is joining us via Zoom.
Trying, I'm sure.
There we go.
Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you. Welcome to the Swan Valley Statutory Planning Committee meeting this morning. You're here to make a deputation on the development application for the telecommunications infrastructure tower on Moore Road in Millenden. Over to you when you're ready. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, members of the panel. My name is Mark Barty. I am representing the applicant Wavecon Operations, and I'm the planning consultant that's been dealing with the WAPC staff in relation to this application. I've tried to, although I'm in the middle of the deputations, I've tried to look ahead as well to address the issues that people have raised in the submissions that have been attached. But just quickly, of course, and the panel would know, telecommunications are an essential service. West Australia underscores this in the State Planning Policy 5.2. And this particular facility will, of course, support tourism, hospitality and other land uses in the Swan Valley, including agriculture being an essential land use. And of course, the need for essential services, it follows, therefore, there'll be a need for infrastructure. And there's certainly nothing in the state planning policy or the Swan Valley planning scheme that would indicate that rural zones or zones similar to that are somehow exempt from needing this type of infrastructure and essential service. I know there's a sheet attached to one of the submissions about property value. Obviously, this is not a relevant planning consideration. I note as well the studies on there are the only two studies that I think exist. They're both very old, and so there are no majority of studies, as the sheet indicates that there are. The federal government, in fact, has also recognised that there is the need for coverage in all areas, but particularly in areas that are struggling with coverage and are in fact considering mandating the provision of mobile phone infrastructure so that people don't get left behind. There are tens of thousands of mobile phone towers across Australia, and of course we have some of the most expensive real estate in the world. In terms of the coverage maps that were provided in the planning statement, it clearly shows that they are 4G coverage maps at 1800 megahertz, and the explanations given clearly show that they are measuring indoor coverage. A quick check of all three carriers' websites shows that indoor coverage is not available in this area on 4G, and there's certainly no 5G. So there is without doubt a service deficit in the area. In terms of the visual impact, there's no direct views from any dwelling. The trees almost completely obscure it from both roads, as the photo montages demonstrate, and painting of the pole will further mitigate that impact. And the panel would also be well aware of the issues of EME safety and compliance as being demonstrated through the provision of an EME report. In terms of stormwater, that will be minimal runoff and that will be directed onto the property. The height, obviously, a mobile phone tower can't be 9 metres high, and the planning scheme doesn't specifically reference towers in any event. The representation from, well, the submission from 135 Moore Road says the tower will be 20 metres from that boundary, but in fact it's at least 60 metres and will be completely screened by trees. I also just wanted to quickly address, I was provided yesterday a markup of the site plan, and we've had time to run that by the landowner. That site plan relates to an additional setback from the western boundary of another 5 metres, from 15 metres to 20 metres, and from the northern boundary from 0 metres to 5 metres. I'm advised that the northern boundary setback is acceptable, and the other setback, it's preferred that it remain at 15 metres because the tower itself is already at 20 metres. And that would minimise interference with existing trees. So that's the advice that we've got from the landowner in terms of us being able to move the compound. I hope that's of assistance.
Thank you very much, Mark. Appreciate your deputation. Members, are there any questions for Mark? Go ahead, Member Hurt.
This is Sue. I was going to ask you, there has been suggestion of another site which is owned by the City of Swan on the corner of Moore and has that been looked at as an alternative site, and what would be the impacts?
Yes. Well, firstly, in terms of the distance away, I can't confirm that it's 600 metres, but let's assume that it is. There was information provided during the course of the application. I don't think it's contained in your agenda, but it might be appended. There was a question asked about alternate properties that were approached in the area, and there was a drawing given showing essentially the area in which we've been asked to search for a new facility. That area extended out, I think it was something like 400 metres, but I'd have to check that. And that extract also marked all of the properties that had been approached for this particular facility. So the first thing I would say is the Shire property sounds like it's too far away. in terms of trying to not only cover the area that's being targeted, but also integrate this new site with the surrounding mobile networks, which is an important consideration. And of course, we're not talking about that site. It may or may not be available. It may or may not be technically suitable. So it's very difficult to know when this is the first I've heard of it. It's very difficult to know whether or not that would be an alternative. But in any event, I would say that this application has clearly demonstrated that it's more than meets the relevant policy requirements.
Thank you, Mark.
Members, any other questions?
Yes.
Members
Thank you. Through the chair, Mark, just a quick question. It states in the report that all the other landowners in that locality were approached and declined having the tower on the property. The only one that accepted was the one that the application is for. Hypothetically, if that property owner also refused, what would happen then? Where would you locate the tower?
Well, first of all, although the other properties, some may have declined, it's also quite common, and I'm sure this was the case here, that there's just no response from people because the initial inquiries are usually done by way of letter, and either there's no response or people do decline, but it's more often that there's no response. So obviously we take that as a no. Your question, unfortunately, is completely hypothetical. One of the key components of locating a facility like this is having a landowner, because there is a commercial leasing arrangement that needs to be entered into to secure tenure on the site. In this instance, we have a willing landowner. So that piece of the puzzle has been achieved. If there was no willing landowner, it might be that there needs to be two facilities instead of one somewhere, in other locations, but I can't tell you where they are. But in this particular instance, we have a landowner, so we don't need to consider what else we might do.
I can see Member Franklin has a question. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I note in the report that this is a neutral host facility, and that there is a potential for capacity up to 3 carriers. I was just wanting to know what the implications of that is in regards to the visual infrastructure that's shown on the elevation plan, and would that actually bulk up that particular antenna further if it was expanded?
Sure. So just by way of just quick context to that, so neutral host infrastructure is the way in which this type of infrastructure is rolled out now. Previously, you'd probably be aware that you would get an application from Telstra or from Optus. That doesn't happen anymore. It hasn't happened for a few years. And the reason for that is the carriers have decided, particularly with the advent of 5G, and that's very capital intensive, that it is better if they concentrate on running and building a network and let someone else worry about the physical assets and looking after them and constructing them, et cetera, and the costs associated with that. So there's been that shift. So that's why you're getting an application from Wavecon, and there's a couple of other providers as well. One's called Amplitel, which owns much of Telstra's infrastructure, and there's another one called Indara, which owns much of Optus's infrastructure and some of Vodafone's. So in terms of that statement is so the application that's before you and the plans that are before you are for a single carrier solution. So there's antennas on a head frame at the top of the tower. That statement, I suppose, is more about ensuring or assuring as well the committee that the co-location is available on the pole, because that's an outcome generally desired, but it's also required by SPP 5.2. Whether or not a co-location occurs is another question, but these applications are put forward on the basis that there is structural capacity, and if, say, for example, another carrier decided to come here and said, oh, we have to make an application for another pole because this one doesn't have enough structural capacity, as used to occur years ago when the carriers would build theirs fit for purpose. The advantage of having infrastructure providers is that it is in their interest to make sure these facilities have co-location capacity. So that reference is more about making an assurance that that co-location capacity is available. If co-location occurs, that would occur almost certainly by way of a low impact addition to the tower, which is exempt from planning approval by the Commonwealth. So there is a set of criteria that if the carriers meet those criteria, they can co-locate or add additional equipment. So that's not something that we even know if that's going to occur. But even if we did know it was going to occur, it is completely separate to this application. But I would also say too that, as you can see from the photo montages, it's very difficult to see the facility through from any public domain, and I would say any dwelling in the area as well. And I think given that co-location would generally occur below the existing antennas, that would be equally difficult to see.
Okay. Thank you. So in what you're saying is that any other approvals wouldn't be required, and there could be some additional infrastructure actually incorporated on that existing pole. Is that
once it's built and becomes a telecommunications facility operationally, as with all telecommunications facilities, it's then available for carriers to consider. For example, the carrier that goes on it originally, in a year or two's time, might have some sort of technology change where it needs to add or change or do something like that. Those changes are permitted as either maintenance activities or as low impact activities. So those changes, they occur all the time and as a complete sort of everyday thing right across Australia. And most of us don't even know that those things are happening. But in terms of new antennas and things like that, they still look very similar to what you can see on those drawings.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Heron?
Yes, thank you, Mark. I had raised the issue around the setback from the north, and you were mentioning that there has been a discussion with the landowner about a site which would enable a level of setback. Can I just bring you back to that? So that there is a site which is acceptable, which is 5 metres from the northern boundary. Is that correct?
So yes. So I only received this information yesterday, but we did manage to get onto the owner prior to this meeting because I thought obviously this would be of interest. So the drawing that I've been provided, I'm not sure if you have that in front of you, has a red markup on it that shows essentially the compound shifted diagonally southeast, and on it is marked a 5 metre setback from the northern boundary and a 20 metre setback from the western boundary. The drawings currently show them as 15 metres and 0 metres. So that's the markup I'm referring to. And as I mentioned, the landowner is content with the 5 metre setback. I had previously expressed in my, there was a previous question about this and I said to the assessing officer that one of the issues with setting off boundaries is that you, especially not very far, you create a little bit of land that's going to need to be looked after in terms of keeping the grass down or whatever it might be. So often landowners prefer things on boundaries, but we have already flagged that that the 0 setback might be an issue. So that's been agreed that setback's okay. And as I mentioned with the western setback, although it would be possible, of course, to set it back that extra 5 metres, as I've already noted, the monopole itself, which is obviously the structure that people are concerned about being able to see, is already 20 metres back from that boundary because it sits at the eastern end of the compound. So there might be little utility in moving it back an extra 5 metres, but I'm in your hands in that regard.
Thank you.
Mark, just on that point, you mentioned that if it was set back a further 5 metres, it may need to result in tree removal. Is that correct, or did I?
Yes, it's difficult. It's difficult to see on that aerial, and there had been previous discussions about setting it back 20 metres, and the feedback that came from the owner was he was concerned about it impacting a tree to the east, although that 20 metre setback then was at a 0 northern setback, so it was in a slightly different location. It's difficult to tell from the aerial photo because you're dealing with shadows and all sorts of stuff, but he has said in writing to us this morning that that 15.5 would be his preference, but we could live with 15.20, albeit the pole is already 20 metres back.
Thank you for the clarification, Mark.
Thank
Are
you.
there any other questions, members? Okay, thank you, Mark. We appreciate your deputation and answering our questions.
Thank you.
Members, just also noting that on the same item, we do have two deputations from Eric Miller against the application and from Leisha Malis also against the application. So that does take us to the same item for consideration. Item 3.1 is the development application for the telecommunications infrastructure, which is the mobile telephone base station and monopole at lot 158 Moore Road in Middleton. And we're joined by Mark Zasbo and Navar Brick. Thank you very much for joining us today. Mark and Navar, you've heard the deputations. We've also heard from Mark about the siting of the tower. Do you have anything that you wish to add?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Probably not a lot to add. Obviously, Navar's done quite a bit of work negotiating throughout the assessment of this application with Mark, looking at alternative locations and sites within the site to try to minimise the potential impact. In this particular instance, we've tried to achieve a minimum 100-metre setback from dwellings. There is nothing that says that there is kind of an arbitrary number, but it's a number that we're trying to use. We've been out on site, we've had a look at it from the various angles. Obviously, on balance, we've recommended that the committee support this application in lieu of the fact that anywhere else within the proximity would raise similar issues. However, this particular site with the number of trees on it, the fact that we're able to achieve 240 metres from one dwelling and 100 from the other dwelling gives us that confidence that we can, on balance, recommend approval.
Members' questions? Mark and Navar, we heard some discussion on the coverage and just wanting your view that the coverage map does go to 4G in terms of what's presented to the committee, and the understanding is that that is the 4G coverage map for indoor connectivity and that there is no 5G coverage currently in the area. Is that correct?
That's what we understand, yes.
Thank you. Members, any other questions?
Sorry, through the chair. There was reference to a location plan. I don't know whether that is available, but in your view, if there was a desire to have a level of setback, would the preference therefore be to provide a level of flexibility for that to be, like if there was to be a condition to have it suitably sited so it doesn't require tree removal, is that something that could be accommodated given the conversation with the applicant just now?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, that is something that would certainly would be our preference to ensure that we don't get any loss of those trees that are there.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Herron, just in relation to that, in response to a question, there were some potential conditions provided there for 5 and 6. Okay, and then if there are no further questions, I will call for a mover and seconder to discuss the item. By Commissioner Herron, seconded by Commissioner Brooks. Thank you very much. Ray, do you wish to speak to the item?
Yes, please. And again, I fully accept that these items are contentious, and having my time in local government dealt with a number of these, appreciate that they can generate some concern. I can also assure that the EME issue in my mind is a non-issue, in that following extensive investigations, and in fact you have these facilities placed on top of hospitals and apartment buildings. So to me, that is, I think we need to put that to one side. What we are considering here is primarily an issue around amenity and I suppose appropriateness, given that infrastructure is required and that these requirements extend and change over time. I do think that in the context of what is being put forward, that the officers have clearly sought to negotiate. I wasn't comfortable with the 0 setback going from 15 to 0, just to me from an aesthetic point of view in terms of future use to the north. And therefore I will foreshadow that I would be moving amendments to the conditions proposed to enable some level of setback and screening to the north. But I do believe that the proposal in that modified form will be an appropriate response to the site context.
Thank you, Commissioner Heron. Is there any other debate or comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, I'm satisfied again, that the infrastructure is needed and that this location is a reasonable location for it to be provided. Again, I would agree with Commissioner Heron. The setback is a slight concern, but given that it's indicated they're satisfied with some movement in that regard, I think it's reasonable to
Thank you, Commissioner Brooks. Is there any other comments? Members Zanino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To be quite honest, I disagree with everything that's been said. This application should have been, well, the recommendation for this application should have been for refusal outright. And I am very surprised that the officers that wrote the report recommended approval. I mean, this is in the Swan Valley Planning Act area. There are certain restraints that landowners have to abide by within their own properties. People bought properties, they've bought land, and they bought it in good faith, knowing that the Swan Valley Planning Act was in place and it would obviously be adhered to in a proper manner. Now, when such applications come in, I do know that, you know, this is a D use. I do know that the application can be approved and is probably a necessary evil. It's something that we all need, but it's the location that is inappropriate, totally inappropriate. There are other locations within close proximity which would not create the angst and objections that this has created. I mean, it's been put out for public consultation. It's obviously unanimous, virtually unanimous. Every applicant or every submission is against it. Now, if this was a normal application by a property owner, it doesn't matter what it was. If that amount of objection was raised, then it would be very unlikely that it would be recommended for approval. I mean, hypothetically, once again, it's hypothetical, if an application by a private landowner was to be put forward to put such a proposal, even say 20 metre in height, would automatically be refused because the officers, the planners would be saying, no, this is totally against the objectives of the Swan Valley planning policy. It doesn't comply with the area and anything else. And it would not go ahead. It wouldn't get the light of day. We are basically a group of people, a very small group of people, and we have been put here to adhere to the objectives and the of the Swan Valley Planning Act on behalf of the community. Now, if the community outcry is no, we don't think that this is appropriate, we should not be jumping in and saying, oh yes, well, forget about what the community thinks. We need to approve it because of X, Y, Z. Sorry, you either defer it and say, well, to the applicant, go back, find somewhere else which is more appropriate, or, sorry, this has to be refused. If we approve this as a committee appointed by the Minister to adhere the Planning Act on behalf of the community, we would not be doing our job properly because we are not representing the community. What we're doing is we're supporting private enterprise, you know, at the expense of the community. So I think you should all think quite hard about what you're actually doing. Are you representing the community? Are you representing the Swan Valley Planning Act appropriately? My answer is no. Therefore, I think that the outcome of this should be you either defer it and ask the applicant to go back and find an appropriate location, or you refuse it outright.
Thank you, Member Zanino. Are there any other comments? Perhaps if I could just make a few comments. It is something that I think many communities deal with when a telecommunications tower is proposed. They are very tall towers, and there's often a lot of community debate about the appropriate siting of these towers. I've experienced it firsthand when I was mayor at the City of Vincent, and I've worked closely with residents about siting of towers to minimise the impact on amenity. I don't think that we can look at this as something which is not the realm of the Swan Valley. It is important that we provide the necessary infrastructure for residents, for businesses, for agriculture to function. It's been talked about today that the map demonstrates that there is a lack of coverage indoor existing for 4G and that there is no 5G connectivity currently being provided in this area. It is a balance for the committee in making these decisions when we consider the needs of the community. And in terms of infrastructure, and this being essential infrastructure, we are, I believe, responsible for ensuring that there is a place for essential infrastructure within the Swan Valley. On the basis of the coverage map that's been provided and the work that's been done to site this as appropriately as possible, given the scale of the tower, I do support this. I do would like to hear the foreshadowed amendment in terms of an additional setback from the boundary on the north. But I think that in terms of the location, the canopy around this, the fact that there has been an identified area in which this tower needs to be sited to provide that essential infrastructure, I think that where this is landing is appropriate. I do note that there have been strong community opposition to this, and I note that I've dealt with that previously because I do think that there is strong feelings about this type of infrastructure in communities. But I think that when faced with a lack of coverage, which could affect business and residents, and I think the teenagers of the Swan Valley may unite and protest if they can't have their access, it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we do provide this infrastructure appropriately. So I just wanted to make those comments.
If I may, through the chair, I'd like to move an amendment to the proposed conditions to add a condition 5 and 6. Condition 5 being that the plans be amended to show the telecommunications infrastructure compound setback 20 metres from the western boundary of the site and 5 metres from the northern boundary to the satisfaction of the West Australian Planning Commission. These measures are from the relevant boundary line to the proposed infrastructure compound and are shown on red on the approved plans. And condition 6, a landscaping plan to be provided showing the planting of screening vegetation, trees between the compound and the northern boundary, and information regarding the plantings on the western boundary indicated on the submitted plans to the satisfaction of West Australian Planning Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Herron. Is there a seconder? Commissioner Brooks has seconded the amendment. Is there any dissent? Dissented by Member Zanino. That amendment is carried. We now have the substantial motion, amended motion before us. Members, I'll put that to you. Is there any dissent?
Yes.
Member Zanino is dissenting. That is carried. Thank you very much.
I'd like my name recorded.
Of course, yes, thank you. So that concludes the open session of the meeting for today. I'd like to thank all of the deputies, and I'd like to request a mover and seconder that we go behind closed doors for confidential items. Moved by Member Hurt, seconded by Commissioner Brooks. That